今日は土曜日でゲストアワーです。今回のゲストは先週に引き続いて大阪大学大学院博士課程で社会学を研究しているリー・トムソンさんです。
I'm back again with Lee Thompson, who we spoke with last week. Welcome back, Lee.
Thank you, Valerie.
Today we'd like to get a little more specific about your interest in professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Let me start with a confession, however.
Yes.
I personally, I guess the word is hate professional wrestling.
Oh.
I never watch it. In fact, when it comes on TV, I turn off the TV. It's really almost offensive for me to watch. So naturally, I'm curious as to why you would choose such a topic.
Well, I have to admit, I'm not a professional wrestling fan myself. As a fan, I'm interested in it from what you might call a sociological point of view, and from that point of view, I find it quite fascinating. So I can sympathize with your reaction to it. I can only maybe encourage you to develop a little what you might call a sociological interest in it yourself, and
I'm hoping you can help me do that
quite
today.
Fascinating. But the reason I became interested in it, as I think I mentioned last week, my field of study when I came here was mass communications, and when I was reading about television in Japan, the development of television in Japan, I came across a very interesting fact, and that was that in the very early years of television in Japan, for the first 10 years, you might say, but even more, the first about 5 years or so, the very, what you might call the fetal stage of television in Japan, the most popular program by far and away was professional wrestling broadcasts.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, the answer is very simple. Well, the first television broadcasts in Japan started in 1953. And the first professional wrestling matches, which were broadcast on television, by the way, were in 1954. This is less than 10 years after the end of the war, and only a few years after the end of the occupation. And the plot of professional wrestling at that time, and it still is pretty much the same now, was you had the Japanese hero at that time, Riki Dozan, beating up the foreign opponents. And the foreign opponents represented, in the short term anyway, the American victors, the American occupiers.
Is this your theory?
No, this is an accepted theory in Japan of students of mass communications or scholars. In fact, there's nothing original about it. I don't give any academic brownie points for saying this. It's in all the books. In fact, people have to go, if people are interested in professional wrestling, they have to go beyond that statement to try to say something else about why it may be, why it was so popular.
Is it still popular in that same?
It has its ups and downs in popularity, but yeah, it still remains quite popular. It's broadcast on prime time television at least twice a week, 2 hours a week.
I've noticed.
At least, yes. And it still features Japanese wrestlers against foreign wrestlers.
Is this different, or is its sociological impact different in Japan than in the West?
Well, I don't really follow professional wrestling all that much in the West, but looking at some professional wrestling magazines and remembering what I used to see whenever I watched it when I was in the States. You have the same sort of arrangement of good guy versus bad guy, but in the States, the bad guys are more diverse. You might have effeminate bad guys. You might have, these days, you have like Arabs or Iranians, or they're imposters. Of course, they aren't actual Arabs or Iranians, but they are people who are posing as Arabs or Iranians, or Russians, In the United States, it's more political or ideological, who is the bad guy. Whereas in Japan, it isn't based on politics or ideology. It's based on what you might even call race. I mean, it's the Westerners that are the bad guys.
This is what you mentioned in your blurb in the text. The main plot of pro wrestling is Japanese against foreigners, which you mentioned before, of course, is sort of an offshoot of wartime leftover feelings, as a very simple explanation. Can't this be seen in society as a whole, in Japanese society, and their approach to the gaijin, the foreign?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's really true. Professional wrestling doesn't reflect only the short view of the war, but I think it reflects the longer view of Japan's relations with the West ever since Meiji period, and it's of course going beyond that, but especially since the Meiji period when the motto was to catch up and pass the West. And I think professional wrestling reflects this. It's only one manifestation, though, however, of a larger image of the foreigner, which I think is extant in Japanese society, and that's of the foreigner as a threatening, aggressive, hulking presence. This isn't the only image of foreigners. There are other images of foreigners. The foreigner as the teacher, the bringer of enlightenment, civilization, that sort of thing. But along with that image, of course, exists the image of the threatening foreigner. And I don't think a lot of foreigners, when they come to Japan, I don't think they realize that that's how they are viewed in many Japanese eyes as a threatening presence. And I think threatening presence. And I think this causes some frustration on the part of foreigners when they come here. They don't understand why people maybe treat them in this way, why they're so afraid of them.
Lee Thompson さんは社会学的見地から日本のプロレスについて研究をしています。プロレスがテレビに登場したのはテレビ放送が始まった翌年、昭和29年のことだそうです。プロレスは最初から人気番組の一つだそうですが、トムソンさんは一つの型があることを指摘しています。つまり、日本人対外人というタイプで、日本人レスラーが外人レスラーをやっつけるという筋書きです。アメリカのプロレスは日本よりも多様化しているそうですが、善対悪の図式のようなものがあり、悪を代表するものにはいろいろなタイプがあり、政治的なものも含まれているということです。日本人の間には欧米に対するイメージが2つあり、一つは外人の先生といういわば欧米への架け橋というイメージと、日本人の存在を脅かす脅威を与えるというイメージがあります。
Speaking of pro wrestling as a sport, you mentioned that it is a controversial subject, or it maintains controversial status. Is this because it's considered by some to be a sport and by others to be pure entertainment, or perhaps theater or comedy even?
Right. Well, yeah, there is controversy. I don't know whether you can use the word controversy because, I mean, it's not a vital subject to the national welfare, of course.
Thank goodness for that.
Although some people might think so.
Right.
But, yeah, there are some people still who think it's all real. Everything that's going on up there is real battle, real struggle. There are other people who admit, that it's all fake. And you find other people who are interestingly on the borderline. Even some of my colleagues at school, they admit that a lot of what goes on is fake, but somehow deep down inside they believe that the victory is truly won. That the strong man wins, and the weak man loses. That the outcome of the match somehow actually reflects the physical abilities of the opponents, and it's interesting to me how people can believe that.
And it's obviously quite staged.
Right. Yes. But there's a lot of things that go on to support the fact that it's true, that it's a real activity, and that is things like blood, and a lot of people, I don't think, are very sophisticated viewers of violence, and if it looks like somebody gets kicked, they believe that they're really getting kicked, if they see some red liquid flow across the forehead, they think it's blood, and they don't believe that anyone acting would, bleed.
Right.
On purpose, no, it has to be real,
Well, obviously you don't watch for personal enjoyment either.
No, I don't watch very much at all, actually.
Right. So your interest is obviously, as we know, sociological.
Right.
Obviously this isn't your main area of interest in your studies and your sociological research. What other areas, briefly, are you interested or else currently doing research in?
Well, I got interested in professional wrestling because of my interest in mass communication. After working on professional wrestling for a while, I found myself becoming more interested in the sociology of sports in general, which is quite interesting. Modern sports are, of course, a modern phenomenon. They're only about 100 years old, and they began, most of the modern sports as we know them began in England, which is also the first country to begin the Industrial Revolution, the first country to industrialize. So there's kind of a link between modern sports and modern society, and modern industrialized society. And exploring that link, I think, is kind of interesting. And being here in Japan, you have indigenous Japanese sports which have become modernized. Like the most obvious example is judo. And then another popular example is sumo. I think sumo is quite interesting because it has modernized to a degree, but it retains a lot of its pre-modern aspects. So looking at sumo, I think you can get an alternative model, you might say, of the modernization of sports in general, and also it might give you some hints about the modernization of Japanese society also.
This is a fascinating topic. I think we could go on for hours more. And I've never been really interested in sports, but to look at it from your angle really makes it a fascinating topic. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you too.
スポーツとしてプロレスの解釈はまちまちです。本気でプロレスが行われており、強い方が勝つと思う人、単なるショーに過ぎないと思う人、ボーダーライン、つまり両方があると思う人がいます。額から流れる血は本物でしょうか、それとも何かの赤い液体か、どっちでしょうか。トムソンさんはプロレスだけでなくスポーツ社会学に興味を持っています。近代スポーツはイギリス産業革命以降、大抵イギリスで始まったわけですが、日本独自のスポーツとしては柔道と相撲を取り上げていましたね。特に相撲についてはある程度近代化という変化をしながらも、昔の日本独特のスポーツの要素を持っていて興味があるとのことでした。
Although he still had that same humorous tone, there was quite a lot of substance in what he had to say today. And I always, whenever I read anything anthropological, well, it's called sociological when it has to do with Western or industrial societies. I always get the same point of view that anything we do, all of our customs, whether it's the way we have our hair cut or, makeup, or all of those things can be looked at from a different point of view.
I think that was the most interesting part of doing this interview with Lee, is I was finally able to look at a subject which I have never really enjoyed in a totally different light and even enjoy it.
Yeah. I'm still wondering, though, is it really blood?
I'll never tell.
Well, that's all for today. Until next time, this is goodbye from me, Takashi Shimaoka.
And this is Valerie Koehn.
And Jeff Clark.
Saying bye-bye.
So long.